are back roads that can take you many places. Among the rolling bluegrass hills, you find classic federal and Georgian architecture.
Most of the old buildings have a story to tell.
The birthplace of one of America's most famous songs. The Bourbon Trail, where thousands visit the distilleries.
Baby boomers kind of shunned it. It was what your grandfather drank.
Not anymore.
We're producing more bourbon in this area than any other place in the world.
And in the middle of it all, you find the monastery even the popes talk about.
It's almost as if there's a magnet out at the end of that driveway that draws people from everywhere.
Because here in the hills and forests of central Kentucky, small-town Americana thrives more than 2 centuries after it all began as that frontier territory. If it feels old, it is. On a cold, crisp autumn morning like this in Bardstown, you could almost think you're back in New England.
It's a wonderful place to be.
Artists like David Moore love this part of the state.
There's a lot of peace to be found out in the woods and in the surroundings.
It's one of those places where families tend to stay put for generations.
A lot of the families that live here, their ancestors lived here. I actually own a farm that my husband's ancestors settled on in 1791, and we still have it.
With roots like that, Dixie Hibbs is the perfect history guide.
You walk in the steps and you sleep in the rooms that your family, your grandmother and your great-grandmother and all. And we are very good in Kentucky in paying attention to our ancestors.
Many came in the 1700s, that first wave of Americans moving west. Abe Lincoln was born not far from here.
And we learned pretty quickly. People wanted to come and walk around the streets and see these old buildings. This is a place you can reach out and touch history.
Seeing our past is a real draw.
You can touch a brick that was made in 1795.
One of the state's oldest buildings, the old Talbot Tavern, was built in 1779. And the legend says some of its many famous guests, like outlaw Jesse James, have never left. And then there's this spot.
He built this house about 1818.
Judge John Rowan built the Federal Hill home in the early 19th century. The sister of songwriter Stephen Foster visited and raved about the home and community.
Came down here at 16, and she participated in all the social activities. After she wrote many letters, she went back home and talked about it all the time. And so Foster grew up hearing about the Federal Hill Mansion in Kentucky.
So the song My Old Kentucky Home was born.
What I always say, it inspired the song, became the state song in 1927. The state allotted some money to buy the property and turn it into what became the first state park.
Yet it appears Foster never got to visit Federal Hill, but you hear the song everywhere. Kentucky's known for a lot of things, bluegrass, horses for sure, but let's face it, bourbon is king.
Bourbon industry is very important to us, and it goes way back.
After about an hour or so, we're going to take all those pressure cookers.
By the thousands, they come to tour the distilleries on the Kentucky Bourbon Trail.
The weather is essential. You can't make bourbon in Florida. Water, weather,
Corn.
expertise. We can ship corn in. You can't ship weather in. Okay.
One of the more interesting tours is Heaven Hill Distillery, where long ago they found a loophole in the law.
You can't use any reference to religion in bourbon. But Heaven Hill, the land that's built on, was owned by William Heaven Hill, one of the earliest people born in this area. Heaven Hill started in 1935, and they took that name from the family. Some of the families still own parts of that land.
You know you're near a distillery when you see these aging warehouses. They're all over this part of Kentucky, and in the summer, the windows are wide open, letting nature do her thing. The upper floors are warmer.
I use the analogy, it's like your home. Homes have attics, living space, and basements, all different temperatures. Down here, it's very cool. It's a slower, more meticulous aging process down here. It's like your basement. Barrels there 10 to 23 years, roughly.
Wow. At Buffalo Trace Distillery in Frankfort, tourists seem to outnumber the workers. New owners bought the old distillery and had an idea.
They rebranded it Buffalo Trace.
The buffalo, millions of them, wandered through these hills and crossed the river here.
They cut trails into the wilderness. They were known as traces. In many cases, these traces were as wide as a 4-lane highway. The Kentucky River's back here about 250 yards from where we're standing. At that time, that river was more of a series of shoals and pools. It's not the modern river we have today. Is right where this distillery sits, there was a very shallow sandbar. For thousands of years, they used that as a bridge, and this was one of the major conduits or crossing points.
Those traces, the trails made by the buffalo, became highways of sorts.
Native Americans followed those traces in, and white settlers later on. They followed them in here to Kentucky because this was the Kentucky territory. It's kind of the untamed Wild West.
And among the settlers came a group of monks from France.
It's a beautiful thing to be a part of this work and this place.
Just outside Bardstown, you find the Abbey of Gethsemani, run by Trappist monks since 1849 and named for the garden Jesus is said to have prayed in the night before he died. Here, prayer mixes with work duties.
Prayer and then study times, morning work time, and back for praises to welcome visitors as if they were Christ, which is a very ancient expression of our tradition in the rule of Saint Benedict. Hospitality is as much a part of anything that we do. We have a very active retreat house, 41 rooms and a lot of people coming and going, and we just love that, having them around with us.
The monks labor long hours on a working farm. Brother Luke coordinates the music program. He grew up in New York.
Born in Manhattan and raised in the Bronx. Lost the accent, but not the attitude.
He has found a home far from the Bronx. Long ago, writer, poet, and social activist Thomas Merton lived here.
Thomas Merton's story is a tremendous blessing for us that happened here. We treasure that. We're so thankful for him. He is much loved and much remembered here. Of course, the list that knew him would be shorter now, but there's certainly brothers who are very well steeped in his teaching. So we're thankful that happened here.
Pope Francis calls him one of the 4 great Americans who shaped values which will endure forever in the spirit of American people.
World renowned and so on. When he passed, you might know his obituary was on page 1 of the New York Times.
Millions of people have read his books. Years later, when the abbot of Gethsemani met Pope John Paul II, Merton was very much a part of the conversation.
And they were all lined up, and the Pope was coming down the line to greet them. So you got your 15 seconds, maybe less. Whoever was before Timothy at 7.5 seconds said, "This is the abbot of Gethsemani," and the Pope got right in poor Timothy's face and said, "Thomas Merton."
He is buried here. Nearby, 2 other graves with an ironic connection. Abraham Lincoln's first teacher is buried right near the sister of Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy.
His teacher was Zachariah Riney, and years later, the grandson of Zachariah Riney became a monk at Gethsemani. The grandson brought Riney in there to Gethsemani in his last year, so he's buried in that cemetery. The sister of Jefferson Davis, the Confederate president, is buried about 20 feet from him. So we have the Confederate president's sister and Abraham Lincoln's school teacher within spitting distance.
The history, the stories, just endless. Here in the rolling Kentucky hills, where visitors pour in from around the world.
It's almost as if there's a magnet out at the end of that driveway that draws people from everywhere.
Around Bardstown, Kentucky, small town Americana lives on.